1, 2. Yep. Okay, cool. So how to SaaS-ify and productize your Drupal distro. Just to see who I'm talking to. How many people actually have a distro that they want to productize? Wow. Okay. Competition. Excellent. And how many? Well, it's most of you. Okay. Relevant. That's great. Right. So I am Ronald. I am a solutions architect at Distro. Distro is it's a UK-based Drupal agency, but we're actually very enthusiastically recruiting for remote teams all over Europe. So if you want to work with a great company, Drupal contribution, support, and all of that, check out Distro. The work I'm talking about now is stuff I did as co-founder of a company called Roomify. Well, we will get into that. If you have any questions throughout, as I said, the presentation really isn't too long. I mean, we can manage how long it's going to be. So if you have any question, just stop me and we can talk about things. So the title, when I started kind of preparing the presentation, the title is How to SaaS-ify and Productize Your Drupal Distro, which is kind of a lie. I mean, this is not a course in how to do this thing. I wouldn't claim to know that. It's kind of one way to SaaS-ify and productize your Drupal distro. Given the knowledge, time, and resources Roomify had available to it at the time that we did it. So it's also very likely that if we did it again, we might do a few things differently. So really, this is only useful in as far as it gives you an idea of the types of problems that we faced from a technical perspective, and the solutions that we found, so you can think about, how you're going to solve your own problems. And I'd love to hear alternative views on things. So, in a way, what we're trying to productize and our market is not very relevant, but I just want to give you a quick overview of what we're trying to do so you have a context. So Roomify specializes in what we're calling Drupal native booking. So it's essentially we support on Drupal.org a number of modules and a PHP library that let you reason about bookings. And bookings can be anything from I want to book a hotel in Milano for Drupal Dev Days for 5 days to I want to book a room for a BOF session from 9:15 to 10:15. And bookings get incredibly complicated. Every organization has its own rules about how it's going to handle bookings and so on. So what we do is we specialize in building web applications that allow your users to book the things that you make available, right? Now, the product we're talking about is something called Roomify for Accommodations. So this is a specific distribution that lets you build the website and manage the bookings of your vacation rental or little B&B or hotel or vacation rentals and so on. So if you want to do like your own Airbnb, you can launch your product and you can get people to add their apartments or whatever, and you can get people to book them and manage the distribution of funds and all of that. Right? So it's a relatively complicated distro. The process is very simple. I'm not sure you can see that, but basically you go to our website, you drink the Kool-Aid, you decide, yes, I'm going to sign up to this SaaS service. You enter a subdomain. You give us your credit card. We love you. And then you sit back and you watch this thing spinning. And at the end of it, you're going to get an email saying, congratulations, you have a website. Go here to log in. And it's actually the Drupal website that emails the user to say, your website is ready, log in, do your stuff, right? So that's the basic idea. This is what we're trying to SaaS-ify and productize. So, step one, build a Drupal distro, right? And right there is like the first mistake we made as Roomify. We were thinking of it as build a Drupal distro. And we know how to build distros. We've been working with Drupal. I've been working with Drupal for 9 years now. My co-founder, one of them is 8 years, the other one is like 4 years. We've done big site builds. We know this stuff, no problem. But that was a mistake because actually what we're doing is an open SaaS, right? So you can at any time, you can sign up to our SaaS service. You can at any time also say, I don't want your service anymore. We're going to give you your code and you can go along and run your thing on your own. So we're building an open SaaS product, not a Drupal distro. Drupal is a choice we made. Our potential customers, our market, it's much wider than Drupal. And actually, they have no interest in the underlying technology, except the people that get excited about the fact that it's open SaaS. But the 99% of our potential customers do not care at all. And this is a huge difference to how we grew up, in a way, learning to do Drupal, where usually, you're a Drupal agency and you go to your client and you say, yes, we're going to do this Drupal site, and there are certain things you need to know about Drupal, and there is a community, and there is a Drupal way of doing things, and you get all these things for free because there's all of us developing this stuff, and then we're going to configure this stuff and give you your website, right? And it's kind of almost something that the client accepts and says, yes, I am joining the Drupal world, mostly, kind of, and so on. In the product case, they don't care. So what we spent a lot of time, you can't really see the interface, but anyway, it doesn't matter. Imagine a simplified interface. What we spend a lot of time doing is hiding and simplifying. And our first iteration was like, we need this. Excellent, there is module X that does thing Y that we need. We're going to add it, and perfect. And then we moved on, and it's also a cultural thing. You're trying to iterate very quickly, you're trying to build features in, and you just release this stuff out and have your test users try them out, and you realize, no, this is an extremely Drupal-y way of doing things, and people come back and say, it says something about a node. What? And you're like, oh, don't you know nodes? Come on. I need to set my home page, but yeah, you just if it's node 3, you just type that in. So, oh, I have to know an ID of something to say what my home page is going to be. And the fix is simple, right? But it's not necessarily something we as Drupal developers think of when we are building things. To add to that, when you're building a product and it's actually a Drupal product, or really any open source product that's based on a number of open source things, releasing a feature is a combination of Drupal core, some contrib stuff that you're going to be adding, external libraries that you're pulling into your code, customizations that you're going to do to all of this, or modules you're going to write and so on, some Drupal configuration that you're going to do in the site, some kind of clicking together stuff. You're going to have to do a UI, and finally, you're going to have to think about roles and permissions, right? So there's all this stuff, and because this is not a monolithic application, just a single thing, and maybe you're pulling in some libraries, but fundamentally you have control from the start to the end, there are lots of interesting things that can go wrong. And the process for us was like build, damn, rebuild, crap, rebuild, maybe now it's okay, right? So what I want to do is break down all those components and just talk very quickly about how we deal with various issues and decisions we took along the way in order to make building a product simpler. Okay, so external libraries, Drupal contrib and Drupal core. This is actually relatively simple in that obviously the product is Drupal 7. I know it's not very cool these days, but it has a history, so respect it. It's yeah. I mean, if you're, I don't think I need to say this in a room like this, but if you're not using Drush Make to handle all your dependencies on how you put your Drupal product together, you're going to have a really hard time. We actually pull in some PHP libraries, so it's Drupal 7, but there's Composer installed that needs to run as well, and that's amazing, fantastic, really makes life simple. You can keep track of all your patches in your makefile, what modules you're using, what versions of modules you're using, and so on. There was one thing that kind of caught us out initially, and in hindsight, it's, yeah, obviously, why didn't you think about it? But at the time, we were so excited about our Drush Make and Composer install process that we literally build our SaaS product to build a Drupal site from scratch every time a user ordered one. And we're like, isn't this cool? We're so smart. Like, this is the best thing ever. Until you think about it and you say, hold on, so every time a client is kind enough to give you his or her credit card, what you're doing is talking to 20, 30 different URLs in order to download stuff and apply patches to modules and so on, which you can do fast enough. That's not necessarily the issue, but it's a failure point. And we would have orders like, oh, order failed. And we're looking in our logs and, yeah, some JavaScript library didn't download, or on some GitHub repository, the maintainer of that library changed the URL. So sucks to be you. So even though, and why did we do it that way? Because we're used to the agency way of building stuff. And yes, when you like build a large Drupal build, you want every time to be able to do it from scratch with Drush Make and Composer and not worry about things. If you're selling a product to people, you don't want those failure points in there. So right now we have, well, a lot of things changed since then, but suffice to say right now the code base is absolutely stable and there is nothing that's going to get in the way to person giving us their money. That's what it is about. Okay, now the part that I am most excited about in terms of how we built this distro. Even though it's Drupal-centric, this external libraries part is actually very important for the Roomify distro. Now, just a small history lesson. Initially, we started with a module called Rooms. On D.O is /rooms. And Rooms solved the booking problem for a vacation rental or a small hotel. Then people started asking for features, and we started adding features. And Rooms became like this Frankenstein monster that was able to do a simple thing really well, and then it was trying to do 1,000 other things so-so, but it kind of did them, so it was kind of okay. So we stopped and said, okay, what are we actually trying to solve here? We're trying to solve the booking problem. So we built a library, PHP library, standalone. You can get it on GitHub, called BAT. And it does all the hardcore reasoning about booking. And the fundamental question it attempts to help you to answer is, I have something which is in state A. over a certain period, and it needs to go to state B. Is that possible? How much is it going to cost? Right? And how many of these things that are in state A and need to go to state B, so state A being available, state B being booked, but it could be anything else, how many of those are there? Right? So that's all the library does. And it doesn't make any assumptions in terms of the granularity of time, so you can book things for 1 minute or 1 night or 1 week. You can't do seconds. We thought, seconds was like you're booking computer time at that point. You're like booking the Hadron Collider or something. So that we're happy not to have to deal with that. So you have a PHP library, and then the Drupal module is just a UI and a configuration tool for the library. That's all it is. It doesn't even do any of the front-end stuff, like the final user stuff. That happens with a JavaScript library called Full Calendar, which is the thing that shows you availability of on a calendar, and you can drag and drop events around and change the time and so on. And the way Full Calendar communicates with the information stored in the Drupal database is through an API module, even though it's the same site, right? And we could potentially do something different. But API uses services, and we do calls there. And the reason we did it this way is so that we can decouple the different components as much as possible, back-end to front-end. And also, even though it's in Drupal, decouple from Drupal and not use Drupal as an application framework when it's a content management framework, and that's what it does well, and that's what we use it for. So yeah, that means we have much more flexibility, and it means also our upgrade path to Drupal 8 is extremely simple, because the library that does all the hard stuff, well, that doesn't care. And the rest is just entities and relationships between entities within Drupal and APIs. So a lot of our code remains very similar. And this is something, aside from kind of SaaS and products and so on, I really think we should be doing more of removing reasoning about how things fit together in libraries and pulling them in our modules, and only use Drupal as a wrapper to do the things it does well, rather than put our application logic in our module. Okay. Next thing. So we did like the core and the contrib and the libraries. Then we have customizations, configuration, and interface support. And here is just opinions to a certain extent. Some of the things that we ended up doing is having a strong distaste for features, even though we use it and it's great and so on, but it's fragile, especially once things start becoming more complicated. And we're very, initially, as I was saying, it was like, we need to do X, there's module Y that does X, throw it in, form alter a few things, clean it up, and so on. Off you go. Done. Moving on. Now we're kind of very precise, and the Roomify team that is kind of taking the product forward is extremely conscious of what's going in or not. And there is a strong weight towards coding stuff ourselves. So unless it's like big stuff, Vue, CTools, panels for Drupal 7, obviously. If a module is literally 30 lines or 40 lines or whatever, we're just not going to use it. Well, even bigger modules. We prefer to just code the things that we need, because it's a product, and there's also not the argument, well, someone else will come along, and no, this is our product. Like, so some of those arguments are not as strong. Okay. Roles and permissions. This was the bane of our lives initially. I mean, it's just permissions page in Drupal, right? um, and it literally, this was happening. Like our developers were going crazy, we were going crazy, and yeah, just it's probably this should cover it, and if it still doesn't work, add some more, and it's going to be okay. So we took a very strong opinion, kind of choice decision again, said we do not want to visit this page ever again. It can disappear as far as we're concerned. And actually part of the issue for us was when you get your site, it's a Drupal site, you don't know that, you do not get site administration permissions or anything like that. You're a specific role in this SaaS environment as far as you're concerned. So you don't see any of the normal Drupal stuff. And there's like a number of different roles, and those roles have a number of different permissions, and these things have to be exactly so. We cannot allow that there are situations where, oh, what's this bit of interface that I didn't know existed before? Let's click and see what happens. Which is, it's kind of an interesting thing because you're SaaS-ifying a Drupal site, which does all these things and has all these URLs that you can potentially visit and so on. And I'm sure if a Drupal developer visited, like they get one of our sites, they try different things, and unless we had very tight control about what's going on, we'd run into trouble. So yeah, we said we're never going to visit the permissions page, and we have a little module called Roomify Rights, that provides hooks that other modules can use. So when other modules introduce functionality, they just say the Casa manager role or the Casa owner role have these permissions and give that back to the system, right? And when we literally rebuild permissions on cache clear, roles and permissions. So we collect all the roles that various modules define and all the permissions that they say those roles should have, and we rebuild that. Initially, I was thinking to put the code here, but then it was like, so I just, yeah, I took it all out, and then I was thinking, should I just take the slide out? But I left it anyway. So there's no interesting code here to look at, but the idea is we collect all the rights that roles are supposed to have. You can alter that, then we get rid of everything that was there and we rebuild it. What's really fun is when you give the site, like the actual code, to a Drupal developer and they set some permissions, and then on cache clear, they're like, what the hell just happened? It's all gone. But this means that, yeah, we don't have to visit the permissions page ever again. And more importantly, we know exactly in code and have a trace of what role should have what permissions, and we can manage that in code. And it's just not something, I mean, obviously you can export permissions and roles in a few different ways with features, but that, again, was too fragile. This is extremely specific. Yeah. Okay, so in terms of actually building the distro, the most important thing really is people don't care about Drupal. I guess if you're coming from the product world, this is not a lesson you need to learn, but if you're coming from the Drupal agency world, at least we actually have to learn this lesson. Limit failure points, obviously. Decouple Drupal, so in terms of what does your front end, a lot of the things we do are that JavaScript library, and it's not as fancy as kind of React or Angular or whatever, but it's a decoupling of how we deal with our front end and exchanging information with Drupal through an API. We decouple from Drupal in that our core business logic is in a PHP library that I'm pleased to hear kind of people are using in different situations completely independently of Drupal. get the behavior as specific as possible. Drupal is a tool that has been built to be configurable and adapt to different user needs. Your product needs to be configurable, but in a completely different way. So in terms of Drupal behavior, you have to get that very specific and have no surprises. Because your end user is not a site builder, which is the end user, I guess, for the Drupal CMS. It's a person that wants to, in our case, manage their bookings, put a few pictures, and get the hell out of there. Okay, so that was step one. Step two, release management. Again, this is something that kind of we had to learn doing things. And initially, our release management kind of looked like this. You know, it's you have something up, and a user will call you, and it's user number 2, and they're saying, "Oh, I would really like to do X." So you're like, "Okay." Code just before you send them their email to say, "Oh, thank you for your request," and so on. Yes, you can now go do this. And we started with very good intentions, and then it ended up being, "Oh, there's stuff we need to fix. Let's just fix it." Happily, those days are over. And now what we have, our week looks like this. And I mean, this is kind of an abstraction, obviously, but in our case, it's very specific. So people actually building things work on feature branches, right? And they just do one thing after the other based on a set of priorities that the release manager and the PM define, right? And they don't necessarily care about releases. They just complete features. There's obviously stuff to worry about in terms of interdependencies and so on, and we have minor point branches and major point branches and so on. But that's what they do. And once they're done, they do a pull request, and it will go through our, well, on every commit, it goes through the entire test suite, and we will go through actual code review, and then QA in terms of a human being going on the site and clicking things around and ensuring that it all makes sense. The stuff, the features that make it through our release, our code review and QA, get released on Thursdays. And we actually try to release every Thursday. And that's kind of one of the reasons it was done, was to make sure that we never have a backlog or a big backlog of things that have not been released. There's going to be some small features that the developer literally worked for half a day on that are going to be released on the Thursday. And there's going to be some larger features that maybe a developer was working on for a couple of weeks or a week and so on. But every Thursday, there's new code going out to our platform. And on Friday, planning, prioritization for the next week, and we just keep doing this. So this makes it, first of all, it's great to have just such a specific plan, and it ensures that also from kind of a marketing perspective, there's always something new to tell users, which they love the sense of momentum, right? I joined this, I bought this product, and there's stuff happening always. Okay, let's see if there's anything I missed. Features, developed in branches, pull requests, tests. Master is always deployable. And something that we enforced as a rule on ourselves is that you literally, unless, so when we tag a release, all the tests run, and then we have a few scripts that are going to package the code to send it to our SaaS platform. If there's no way to do this unless we pass the tests. I mean, we could go in manually and run the scripts and so on, but it's very labor intensive. So unless everything comes up green, that release is not going to happen. And we prefer to miss a Thursday and not have anything new, rather than change our system. And I mean, to me it's funny saying this stuff now, because I know what we were doing before. And I'm like, oh yeah, we don't send everything unless everything passes tests and so on. But there's going to be a period where you're going to break the rules, and then you have to stop. And when you're breaking the rules, you need to know that you're breaking the rules, and then you have to stop, and you have to make it so it's actually hard for you to break the rules, because it's a human thing. I mean, we have discussions, like we'll get users emailing us and saying, we'd love to have this feature. And we have it. It's almost there. If someone spent a few more hours today, we could release it tomorrow, right? And that's the thing you have to stop yourself from doing, because it's going to be fine if it goes out next week. It's not the end of the world from the user's perspective. But from your perspective, you might very well, because you got a bit excited about a feature, you might end up breaking everything for all your users, and then you're going to lose them, et cetera, et cetera. So once kind of the platform starts growing, it makes a lot of sense to do it this way. Okay, how much time do I have? Great, I'm almost done. So we talked about Drupal distro and a few of the things we do to build it. Then we talked about release management, hosting, and monitoring. This was kind of a long process for us. It was quite hard to get right. We tried a lot of different things. And I'll just tell you the story, because that's the only way it makes sense. So initially, we were like, great, we want Drupal sites. We do not want to be doing the hosting. We're very adamant about that. We have enough to worry about. We're a small team. Let someone else worry about this. We talked to Pantheon, and how many of you know about Pantheon? Excellent. They don't have an API that makes it easy to configure a site. So our users go to our e-commerce site, they choose a few things, and then you have to launch this thing. At the time we talked to them, I should specify, they couldn't do that. So that wouldn't work for us. We talked to Platform, and they actually do have an API, right? And we were like the first people to use their API to do these things, which was a whole experience on its own. Then it kind of didn't work because of also cost issues and us learning more about what are we really? So when you do SaaS, what kind of company are you really? And I'll talk a bit about that later on. Then we said, okay, let's use some of like the open source stuff. We were on Azure briefly. We actually have a few things still there. We tried Open Dev Shop and so on. And none of that worked. None of that quite fit our module, our way of wanting to handle our SaaS service. And it's not because any of this is not good. Actually, all of this is really fantastic. It's amazing technologies. You should use them. The problem is there's kind of a fundamental difference between tools that are built to manage Drupal sites for agencies, which is what the Drupal world is 99.9% about, and a SaaS service. And so we were hoping that we wouldn't have to roll our own, but we ended up having to do that because we're selling sites. So like it or not, we're a hosting service. And we have to deal with that fact, and we have to deal with the fact that we have to be competitive. We're selling sites. The average cost for a site on with us is about $40. And there's lots of different pressures that set this price, right? You have competition and so on, so you can't go crazy. You can't tell them, well, it's a Drupal site, so it... No, per month. So you're going to pay more for it. Like, they don't care, as we said. You need a lot of flexibility and you need to move quickly. All those hosting services have, and tools even, have a number of different concerns. You need space to innovate. You need to plug in different services. You need to plug in even just little scripts that do maintenance for stuff that only you know what they're required for. And in general, you need your own tooling. So unfortunately, I think right now, there isn't a good competitive option as a hosting platform for SaaS. So if you want to SaaS-ify your Drupal distro, I don't think, unless your Drupal distro is not really a SaaS thing, but it's like, it's very expensive, so you charge, I don't know, a few hundred a month as a SaaS product, then maybe you can get away with it. But if it's your typical SaaS product, which is between $20 to $40, kind of a mass market thing, it's very hard to be competitive. So what we ended up using is OpenShift, which is pretty cool. OpenShift is like a Red Hat platform as a service, right? And they have this concept of gears that you plug in together, and in like a few weeks, we're able to put together something that can really scale. And let me just talk you quickly through what the architecture is. Essentially, it's a collection of multi-sites, right? Depending on kind of the plan that you have, you're going to go into a single repository, and in sites, there's going to be your subdomain, and that's your site. So it's a multi-site installation. When we tag a release, as I was saying before, Travis is going to package all that up and send it to OpenShift for us in our PHP gears. We have like a rolling update of the sites, because obviously you have to call cache clear and updb and so on each one of your sites. And that's a scary thing when it's a SaaS service, because there's no, you want to avoid maintenance windows. And something we're thinking we haven't done yet, but we're kind of put the framework in for, is to have a completely mirrored version where, and then just switch them over with DNS. So you do your cache clear, your updb, and you switch over that domain to the new site. Some files, like the generated CSS and JS, we actually store on local storage in those gears. Everything else goes into S3. Our database is RDS, so Amazon Web Services. And we have Logstash for logging. So all the sites, they send their logging information over there, and we search it with Elasticsearch and so on, so we can see when things go wrong. OpenShift has a specific cron service, like a cron gear that you attach to everything else, and that does all the cron stuff that we need to do on our sites. And we use something called Datadog for monitoring and so on. And yeah, balancer and all of that. So that's what we ended up doing, and it's actually, we thought like it was going to be this really hard thing, And to a certain extent, it's complicated, but you can get it done in a reasonable time frame. And it costs so much less than actually using one of the external services. So like the moment we went onto this infrastructure, we dropped all our prices and were immediately competitive with some of our main competition. What else did I want to say here? Oh, and yeah, OpenShift gives startups 6 months free, which is, you can't really argue with that. That's pretty good. Yeah, so then you've built your thing, right? You did your distro, you have your release management, you're hosting all this in your amazing hosting service that's scalable and so on. Then it's going to be awesome. Yeah, there is a huge part of what it means to do a SaaS service, and you can build it the way we did. You can build it some other way. That's not really the issue. It's this and this that are interesting. But yeah, in terms of building it is doable. I think some of them, we were constantly asking ourselves, do I have time? No. We're constantly asking ourselves if it makes sense to actually use Drupal and not build like a monolithic application. And the answer time and time again is it does make sense because we were able to be hugely competitive without having to have the investment and resource that our competitors put into it. And we can innovate very quickly. Okay, the end. I should remember to thank everyone that is sponsoring this and remind you that Distro is hiring. So if you're looking to work in distributed teams, get a 5-week sabbatical, come talk to me, or Christian over there. Great, thank you very much. There's any questions? I think, yeah, let's start over there.
Actually, there are 2 questions during your really great presentation, so congrats.
Cheers.
First is, you mentioned the life cycle of your project. Every week you release. But what is about the hotfixes? There is something. You do deployments like every day with hotfixes, or you are waiting for the next release?
So the question is, when I showed like the release management cycle, I didn't talk about hot fixes, and that's a really good point. Hot fixes, we will do a deployment. I mean, if something is broken, we will fix it and send a hot fix onto the, obviously everything has to pass, but yeah, we'll send those in. We won't wait for next Thursday.
Second one is a really kind of important part, what you just briefly mentioned about testing. What do you use for it? Like GitHub or Productize maybe?
Right. I completely forgot to talk about that. I knew there was something else. So the question is, what do we do for testing? Our testing, there's 2 levels. Because a lot of the reasoning is in this PHP library, that's all unit tested, which is great. It's fast, it's easy, it's simple. The rest is Behat tests. And struggling with Travis, because most of the times our tests fail, it's because there's something going on with the test infrastructure. And use the Chrome engine instead of Firefox if you want to do tests on Travis. Cool. Yeah. So the question is, why multi-site instead of like individual sites? And there's 2 reasons, I guess. One is simplicity of because we started, actually, when we started with Platform SH, everything is like a completely independent site. But then once you start thinking of the scaling and monitoring of that, that starts becoming quite complicated. And even just sending the code out to all these different sites and going back to reduce the failure points, things can go wrong in a number of different ways. And the second issue is it's still a resource issue. Like, you can contain resources if it's not cool and but it's it's far more stable. Yeah. Any other questions? Yes, jump.
I was wondering, you said you made some choices to hard code some functionality instead of using modules, and you also said that you still want to use Drupal because of the huge time, speed, agility advantage that you get from using Drupal. Not just in theory, but in your experience, what about updates, security issues, losing agility, or losing the benefit of community contribution?
Yeah. Yeah. Very good question. So just quickly for the camera, is the question is, we decided to code some of our own stuff, even though there's contrib modules that we could use, and don't we lose some agility there, and what happens with security and so on. The answer is that not all Drupal modules are equal. And there is really a value judgment from our perspective. So, and it's a very selfish one. Like, the really hard stuff, we want other people to do. And we will gladly use that. Like, we use the group module, actually, that Christian works on, and there's no way ever that we would want to build that and have to worry about that code base. But if it's a module that does social sharing, and it's kind of a simple thing, we don't want to depend on that module. So as the complexity of the modules goes down, we are far more likely to not use them and just do something ourselves. Cool. Anything else? Excellent. Thank you for coming.